Prestbury sits just beyond Cheltenham's bright avenues, where lanes fold back into hedgerow and the Cotswold edge lifts like the hem of a coat. By day it is tidy gardens and sandstone walls. By night it keeps older habits, paths that remember feet long gone, doors that mind themselves, a bell that knows when to breathe. The village is courteous with its mysteries. It sets them down carefully as you would lay a book aside for a sleeping friend. Tonight we'll move softly. 5 tales, told without hurry, with room for breath between them. A hooded figure who walks as if he is late for a prayer. A rider no hedge can halt. A messenger who keeps to a route the modern map forgot. A healer's shadow with pockets full of herbs. And a quiet man who counts the graves at dawn. If, as we go, you grow drowsy, that is allowed. The village will carry you the rest of the way. We'll keep to old courtesies, step aside on narrow paths, speak low near church porches, and leave a little light where a light was once kept. Elsie took the bell keys as if they were a promise. The key fob was ordinary, the bells were not. She had joined the ringers that winter, frozen fingers, warm tea, the deliberate mathematics of changes laddering up through sound. St. Mary's sits square in the middle of Prestbury, its tower an old neighbour who has seen too much to be surprised anymore. On certain evenings the stone seems to lean toward the lane, the way a face inclines to catch a quiet word. She liked to arrive early, unlock the south door, set the heater to a hopeful click, run a hand over the rope coils until they lay tidy and companionable in the dim. On the first week of Advent, she paused, listening without knowing what she was listening for. The yews kept their heavy breath. The porch smelled faintly of wax and cold stone. Something like footsteps threaded the gravel. No clatter, no hurry. Only the methodical hush of weight applied to small things. "Evening," she said, and felt ridiculous at once, but saying it eased the tightness just behind the breastbone that comes of being the first to arrive anywhere important. She lit a single candle on the sill inside the porch and did not strike the others. A church should decide for itself how bright it wishes to be. The others came, ropes uncoiled, the rounds began. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, like a ladder placed gently against the air. Elsie settled into the work, the way a seam finds the right lay along a curve. Between touches, she looked down through the trap and saw in the porch the candle she had set. One small steadiness in a church made of steady things. After practice, she locked up and stood a moment beneath the yew. Frost had threaded the grass. The tower, a patient vertebra, held the night as carefully as it held the day. Again, the gravel spoke, soft interval, and again there was nothing to see, only a roll of darkness moving as breath moves toward the porch. It paused just short of the door, as if waiting to be asked in. "Service isn't till Sunday," Elsie said without thinking, and then, more gently, "But you know that." The pause lengthened, became a kind of listening, and finally passed away the way a dutiful thought passes when it has checked what it needed to check. The next week was colder. In the vestry, she found an old prayer book with a note in a tidy hand. "The abbot walks on high feasts. Treat him as you would a latecomer who wants no fuss." She smiled, told no one, and set the book back exactly as it had been, because some notes are not for committees. On the 4th Sunday of Advent, she brought a thermos and 2 mugs, which is a kind of courtesy to a silence that has kept you company. The bells were pretty, the rounds honest. The village received what it had asked for, a ladder of sound up which the day could climb. When they had finished, she lingered. The porch kept its littleness, oak, iron, stone, and the candle she set on the sill, yes, the same, watched the door with the mild attention of a dog. Footsteps, slow and grave, They entered by way of absence, as dusk enters a room already half dusk. Between one breath and the next, a taller darkness veiled the stone just outside the porch. Elsie did not try to see its face. She felt the long habit of a hood, the weight of cloth falling straight, the intentional tread of someone who has all the time in the world and no time to waste. It turned just before the oak, and the air altered, the way air alters when a person chooses to remain outside rather than cross a threshold. "Good night," Elsie said, and poured tea into the spare mug, which steamed up and made of itself a small cloud. She left the mug on the outer step, where it would cool without being missed. Behind her, the nave accepted the last of the bell's warmth. She had the sense, as clear as a bell's tail note, that the porch, and whatever kept to it, approved not of her courage, but of her manners. When the others had gone, she tidied ropes, warming them through her palms the way you warm the hands of a friend. She thought of the note, "Treat him as you would a latecomer who wants no fuss." On impulse, she chalked, small and neat, a double V on the inside of the porch, a pilgrim's protection, the kind that keeps fear from wearing someone else's name. She did not know if such marks mattered. But her grandmother had said once that marks are a way of thinking with the hand when the mind is too busy being shy. In the weeks that followed, she did not seek the steps, and they did not seek her, which was agreeable to both. Once, she found a faint trace of damp footprints that stopped at the threshold and went no further. Another time, she discovered the tea mug outside, clean as if rinsed with frost. When spring began to nudge the hedges awake and the bells learned again the bright quickness of weddings, Elsie taught a new ringer how to lean his weight without bullying the rope. "It's all courtesies," she said, surprising herself. "You step aside for what needs passing, you keep your place. You don't pull when it isn't your pull." She did not say the rest, that some churches keep a latecomer who never wants a fuss, and that if you leave a candle where it can see the door, the night will do the rest. She did not say it because it did not need saying. The tower knew, the yews knew, and the gravel, which remembers everything, kept its grammar unbroken. Noah ran at dusk because the village made sense then. In daylight, the burgage was all parcel vans and friendly nods. After tea, it became a straightened thought drawn between two hedges, the old line of a ride laid across a newer map. His trainers made the small, agreeable sounds that tell you you're moving without argument from your knees. He had moved to Prestbury to be nearer to his father, who did better when someone checked the medicine box and changed the bulb in the lamp that flickered. Running was a way to be a body when the head had been busy all day making lists. He came to the burgage the way everyone comes to certain streets, to be held a little true. The first time it happened, he had thought the weather was changing. The air pressed. The hedge leaned its green shoulder a fraction nearer the lane. There was the sense you get when a theatre hushes at the second bell. Then, from nowhere and everywhere, the hooves. Not a clatter, not the merry noise of the hunt, but the full, low thunder of weight moving quickly over ground that remembers weight. The sound came toward him, bunkered through him, and fled beyond him in the same measured panic a storm has when it has a schedule to keep. Noah stopped because he was not a fool. He stepped to the hedge, palms flat, head tipped, the way you do when someone needs a margin and you have one to lend. Nothing passed that his eyes could count, yet the hedge flinched in a ripple and set itself again. A breath later, there came that second, fainter sound. Harness leather having its say, a stirrup iron's little argument with itself, the long exhale of a horse that would rather slow but knows it cannot. He laughed once, the relief laugh that is also respect. "All right," he said. "Go on then." The air undid its pressure one notch at a time, as if fingers released the thought of a fist. At the kitchen table, his father listened and nodded. "You'll want to step in off the crown of the road," he said, and offered a biscuit as if that settled it. "Eastertide is the likeliest," he added, though neither of them kept a calendar good enough to predict the old roots of sound. Noah found himself keeping little courtesies. He did not cut the corner by the low wall where the lane narrows. He left space. He spoke low. He learned the ordinary faces of the burgage, fern on old stone, the lamp that winks early, a window where someone always seems to be knitting, and he learned that sometimes the lane is not for you. One rain-bright evening, he overtook a pair of teenagers filming themselves walking backwards with serious faces. He caught the first sign of pressure and the quick tilt of the hedge as the lane decided what came next. "Step in," he said, not urgently, but the way you advise someone that the kettle has already boiled. They obeyed without questioning. The thunder came through, careful as thunder can be, lifting and placing itself in a gallop that was all direction and no destination. When the air eased, the taller of the two laughed and said, "Sycophant, how did you do that?" Noah shook his head. "I didn't." He began to see the ride not as a haunting, but as a memory the road liked to rehearse, the way a choir warms a phrase through muscle until meaning arrives. Easter came and went. On Maundy Thursday, the lane trembled, and afterwards the smell of hot iron lingered as if a farrier had left the door just ajar. On Good Friday, he did not run. You do not run on every road every day. He walked the burgage slowly, raised a hand to the houses that watched him with the tolerant patience of old bricks, and left at the corner a small white stone he had found that morning, because some roots like to be told they are seen. Later, when summer pressed its heat into the hedges until they breathed time, Noah took his father out with the stick and the hat that made a good joke of being 80. They went slowly. At the place where the ride is closest, the old man stopped of his own accord. "Here," he said, and set the stick aside and put his palm flat to the air, not the hedge. "Here." And because sons learned late the right questions, Noah did not ask why. He stood with him and matched his breath to an expectation he could not name. The sound did not come then. There is no magic in being prepared. The lane has its own schedule. But afterwards, the two men walked home a little taller, and Noah realized that making room for something that is not yours can be a way of taking up your own shape more honestly. On another evening, just at the turn where a garden gate makes a privacy of roses, he felt a change at his back and stepped aside without thought. The thunder shouldered through, urgent and disciplined. In its wake, a single metallic tink fell to the tarmac like a punctuation mark. He looked down and saw nothing, but for the rest of his run, he had the precise conviction of a dropped stirrup iron going on without itself, which is not melancholy at all, but a kind of faithfulness. He told no one. The burgage does not require belief, it requires courtesy. If you run there at dusk and the air presses as theatres press, step to the hedge and lend the lane a margin. The ride will pass, the roses will hold their breath, and then resume breathing. And if you feel a heartbeat later, the ghost of a horse's warmth along your sleeve, take it not as a shiver, but as proof that some tasks persist in their completion long after we have found other work to do. Libraries taught Lena how to wait. Mill Street taught her how to walk while waiting. She had come to Prestbury to catalogue a bequest that smelt of damp and saxifrage, parish histories, handbills, sermons stiff with dust. In the long afternoons when paper sank into the quiet like a pebble into a pond, she took herself down to the lane where cottages lean in like old men telling the same joke for the pleasure of its shape. Mill Street is always going somewhere slightly older than wherever it arrives. You can see it in the way the curbs have softened under years of small wheels. You can smell it in wood smoke that smells of orchards, not forests. Lena walked with hands in pockets, the way you do when you're careful not to ask questions of a place that knows more than is polite to tell. The first time she saw him, she thought he was a man late for tea, brisk, head tipped, a look about the shoulders that says the errand matters more than who gave it. He did not glance at her. He did not glance at the house where a child's bicycle leaned, disapproved of by its own handlebar. He trod a line that made no sense with the present paving, but lined up, perhaps, with a gate that had been a gate when the lane still remembered hooves. He wore a short cloak, the practical kind that minds the weather without making a speech about it. His boots were not boots, they were a suggestion of boots. When Lena slowed, he did not. When she quickened, he did not. He passed the lamp that everyone agrees is not necessary but loves, paused as if surprised by the presence of a star that had climbed down to help, and then carried on until the cottages decided he had gone far enough and folded the sight of him into their angles. What was strange was not that he appeared. It was that he adjusted. The second week, he took a step to the side at the place where a low wall bulged, not because he saw it, but because the habit of not knocking things over survives us. The third week, when a car had tucked itself carelessly on the verge, he seemed to frown, only a bringing together of purpose, in the air above his shoulders, and then slightly altered his line to pass through a gate that had stopped being a gate around the time Lena's great-grandmother stopped using nib and ink. She began to bring small things, the way you bring time to a stew you're not sure needs it, a chalk scrap, a slate chip, a postcard of the parish map, circa 1840. She was scrupulous, left them on window ledges as if forgotten by someone else. She did not set anything in the lane. You do not feed a path, but you can set out the language in which it once thought. One evening, she stood where two doorsteps made a square of courtesy, and the messenger passed her so close she felt the temperature of old wool. It is a specific cool, like shade, that has learned to be kind. In that moment, she knew, without evidence, but better than evidence, that he had long ago carried a message that did not arrive and had spent an honest portion of the time since making sure no part of the lane would stop being a lane on his account. It is not guilt, it is maintenance. The librarian in her could not help the itch of scholarship. She pored over maps until the parish boundaries began to look like animals with their own nervous habits. Twice in 2 centuries, she found mention of a steward who kept the walk, and once of a boy trusted with a letter on a night when letters mattered. There were no names. Names are not always the relevant part of a story. In January, the lane grew tight with dusk before tea. The messenger kept his time, just after the day considered itself finished, just before people pulled the curtains and left only house shapes on the street. Lena waited with hands warming around a paper cup. When the rhythm in the air changed, the particular readiness a lane gets when something returned to it is nearly home. She set the cup on a step and stepped aside so the space would be a little larger for whatever passed. Evening, she said, as she had learned to say to all honest things. The messenger angled slightly, as if nodding to a rule. He kneeled, not really, but the air lowered itself the way a knee lowers, and reached for something not there. The slot in a door stained darker by a century of hands, perhaps, or the iron ring that lifted a latch. Lena, feeling suddenly that a polite idea had misplaced its object, reached in her pocket and found the 1840 postcard folded twice. Without thinking, she held it up where a letterbox would once have been. If anything changed, it changed inside the lane. A small relief moved along the bricks, like a cat deciding the house was in order. The messenger's course straightened by a hair's breadth, and his going away felt less what? Not less urgent, less alone. He took his old road like a thought that had finally remembered the word it was after. Lena went home, as you go home when you have been allowed to help without being necessary, She put the postcard back in the drawer and labeled it used, in a hand so small you would miss it if you were in a hurry. She told no one, but she kept walking Mill Street at the hour when the lamp is the right amount of unnecessary, and she kept her pockets amicably full of minor maps. If you go there and feel a purposeful air go by, let it have the straight of the pavement and stand where people used to stand while errands passed. You may see no more than the tilt of a cloak where a shadow should not have a cloak. That is plenty. Not all messages arrive in the addresses we expect. Sometimes their destination is only the lane itself, glad to have its function named again. Hannah did not move to Shaw Green to be brave. She moved because the cottage had a bow window that kept the winter sun like a cat keeps a chair thoroughly. The garden was a shag of herbs gone feral, mint muscling through time, lavender that had lost the trick of being upright, angelica disgruntled with the century. The agent said, "A bit of a project which is estate agent for you will need to love it back to itself." Hannah had time, and she had a willingness to learn what the soil remembered. The first night she lay in the small bedroom with its affectionate slant and listened to hedgehogs make up their mind about the compost heap. Around 2, a scent slipped under the door, quiet as a kitchen ghost. Lavender pinched between fingers to check if it's still itself. Thyme bruised under a knife. Vinegar warmed in a spoon. It was not unpleasant. It was like being allowed to stand in the doorway of someone making medicine for someone they loved. "Hello," Hannah said, because the house felt like a room you enter where someone has already begun the work. In the morning she found, on the sill by the back door, a bundle of stems tied with twine the color of dishwater. Old thyme, old lavender, a leaf she did not name. It might have been rubbish left by a previous owner. It might have been a suggestion. She set it politely in a jar of water. Later, when she lifted it to throw away, the stems left a clear belling of scent on her palms, and she set them back again without scolding herself for sentiment. Neighbors brought the useful things neighbors bring. One, hat brim like an old coin, said simply, "The grey woman was a healer, clever with plants. If you smell lavender at odd hours, that's hers. It isn't a warning." Hannah worked in the garden with patient incompetence, which is the only kind that learns anything. She cut the lavender back until it looked accusatory, and then, the next week, generous. She found under the mint a small square of flags, the sort that make useful work of mud. In one corner, the stone showed a crescent brightening where something had been set there often, a jar, a candlestick, a pestle's base. She put her own jar there, not to keep the past happy, but to give her present the same pocket of purpose. At odd hours the scent moved through the cottage, lavender that remembered being medicine, vinegar that had warmed hands. Once, in the hall mirror, Hannah saw not a figure but a hush shaped like a person who has put down a burden. It was not grief. It was the sigh that comes after you have done what you can for the day and must leave the rest to the night. A wet Tuesday sent her to the record office with a notebook the size of a palm. She found mention of a woman learned in simples who had petitioned for clemency when a fever took more than it spared. The details were nothing like certain, but the feeling was. Hannah copied nothing. Names are not always the part of a thing you can carry. When she came home, the cottage had the good smell of old stone kindly damp. She lit one lamp and put the kettle on and set her palms on the little flagged square where the bright crescent showed. "I don't know what you needed this space for," she said into the companionable quiet, "but I'll keep it tidy. Need does not end at the edge of a single lifetime. The space itself will find its uses." In spring, the anxiety of the garden lifted and everything remembered who it was. Hannah hung lavender stems in small, obedient bunches from a beam and wrote, with pencil on quiet paper, the dates she had cut them. A friend came to stay and woke crying at 3 for no reason. Hannah brewed thyme with honey and a slice of lemon and found, without being shown, the exact place on the kitchen flag where the mug should stand until it reached the temperature that helps and does not scald. That night, the scent came stronger. A little camphor, a little sweetness, a shadow on the wall shaped like a shawl hung up to dry. "You can stay," Hannah said, and then laughed at herself, and then stopped laughing because the laughter felt like speaking too loudly in a room where someone rests. She kept small courtesies, never boots on the flagged square, the herb path learned by heart for walking in the dark, a saucer on the sill with a clove or a coin, not payment, but recognition. In return, or simply alongside, the house needed less explaining. It became the kind of place where hands lower their shoulders. On a day when the news had made the air taste of tin, Hannah mixed a little vinegar with lavender and set it by the bed on a saucer. Not a charm, a habit. She slept as cleanly as a child who has not yet learned to carry other people's lists. In the morning, the saucer was dry and smelled faintly of thyme, though she had not added any. "Thank you," she said to the room, and felt foolish and did not mind. If you walk Shore Green when the light is that deep green gold the hedges make just before rain, you may smell lavender and think of soap. But if you stand still and let the scent come on its own time, you may find it mends something you did not know had torn. The grey woman is no terror. She is the shadow of the labor of care. If she passes your doorway at 3 with the smell of vinegar in her skirts, it is not to frighten you. It is to remind the house what hands do when they mean well. There is a kind of mourning that belongs to people who put keys in locks, postmen, nurses coming off, groundskeepers with pockets full of twine. Tom took such mournings for his own. He liked the old burial ground at the edge where Prestbury gives way to the fields, liked how the iron gate told the palm the exact size of the past, liked how stones keep their gossip quiet and still tell it to the grass. He had begun helping the parish on Saturdays, the way a man does when he doesn't yet know he wants to be useful and then discovers usefulness is a habit he means to keep. He cut back bramble as if negotiating with an acquaintance who thinks a joke is better if told 3 times. He lifted fallen slates back upright and braced them with a wedge of good sense. He knew the names that weather had almost taken, and the names weather would keep because love keeps them. In the half-light that believes in fog, he saw a man walking. Not a threat, not a surprise, simply the correct thing seen at the correct hour. The figure wore a dark coat of a length fashion has abandoned and age has defended. He took small steps that believed in destination. He did not hurry. He did not stop. He walked the length of the ground, turned where a tree had once made a rule for the path, and vanished where the fence had fallen 10 years back and been mended in the fashion of men who intend to mend it better later. Tom watched the grass remember wait and then forget. He waited for the sense of fear to arrive, and it did not. What came instead was the desire to match his pace to the man's, as you do when a stranger is walking in the right direction and has seen more winters than you. On the second Saturday, Tom set his thermos on the big flat stone that makes a good table and listened. There was prayer in the air, but not the kind that asks, the kind that keeps a tally out of respect. A murmuring that shapes the mouth around names so that the names continue to be shaped, even if no one else is there to hear. He could not catch words. They stood behind the fog like polite people at a window. A groundskeeper in 87 had written in a margin somewhere, Tom found it later, that the air went cold as if a cupboard had been opened on a winter coat. He felt that now, the brief loan of someone else's season. He zipped his jacket, not because he minded the cold, but because it is impolite to receive warmth and not return something of the same currency. An elderly woman appeared by the gate, the face of someone who has mislaid a thought and knows it will return if she treats it kindly. "Can you help me find the one with the willow on it?" she asked. He could. He took her arm courteously, as you take an arm that has learned to trust such taking. They walked the length of the path the walker took each morning. At the place where the tree had once made the rule, she paused and said, "I used to come with him. We used to count." "Would you like to count?" Tom asked. And they did, stones, not years, and found the willow at 9. She stood a while and arranged her mouth in the small movements of someone who will not bother the dead with noise but will bother happily with remembrance. When she had finished, the fog had thinned enough to offer them to the day. "Thank you," she said. "Not me," he said, and pointed with his chin toward the line the walker had taken before them. She nodded, as if she had expected nothing else. In the weeks that followed, Tom learned the measure of the path as well as the walker. He knew the time to be there, the moment when birds decide rehearsal is over and the performance can begin. He set little things to rights under his breath. He picked up a wind-dropped program of a funeral and set it on the notice board, where it would become part of the air instead of part of the grass. He told no one because telling would have asked for explanation, and explanation is not a language the old ground enjoys. The vicar, who knows more than he admits, thanked Tom for the bramble and said only, "Some counts are ongoing." On a dawn when rain had drawn a white veil across the fields and made of the gravel a polite noise, Tom reached the gate as a young runner reached it too, wet hair, impatient feet, the breath of someone who hasn't learned yet that mornings can be owned by the slow. The runner meant to cut through. Tom raised a hand, and the young man, to his credit, lowered his speed without losing it. Together they waited an ordinary minute, while the walker took what was his. Length of ground, small bough at the willow, vanishing near the mended fence. "What are we waiting for?" the runner asked afterwards, unembarrassed by having waited. "For someone to finish," Tom said. "He always does. If you go when the fog writes the names with its finger and then erases them again, you may see nothing but the improvement a path makes to itself after being used. That is a good sight. Some prayers are nothing more or less than the keeping of a route. If you stand aside and let a man about his counting pass, you may find your own lists easier to live with. And when the gate gives the palm the exact size of the past, you will understand why some keys feel like promises. Prestbury dims its lamps one by one, and the village folds itself along its older seams. The Burgage breathes out, Mill Street keeps its patient line, Shaw Green scents the dark with lavender, and St. Mary's lets the ropes cool on the wheel. Kitchen windows make small squares of honey on the hedges. A fox writes a brief sentence in the dew. Somewhere a latch remembers the shape of a careful hand. If any small courtesy from these walks has come home with you, stepping aside in a narrow way, setting a cup where a cup belongs, letting a message pass without needing to know its words, let it rest by your pillow and keep watch in your stead. The lanes will finish the counting. The stones will hold the names. The house will remember how to be kind. Breathe as the bells breathe after ringing, slowly, evenly, with a little space left over for grace. Sleep now. When you wake, the village will have kept your place. Please subscribe to this channel to be alerted to the next episode of Ghosts of the Cotswolds.